My name is Sheila Wilson, and at 68 years old I thought I knew my son Jackson better than anyone. As a retired school teacher and widow, my two sons were my whole world. David, my younger one, has always been an open book. But Jackson, he was complicated. Last Christmas, while preparing for our family gathering, I accidentally overheard my eldest son say something that shattered my heart. The greatest gift would be if she died, so I could finally get my inheritance. What happened next changed our family forever. If you're watching this story, I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Hit that subscribe button to hear how I turned the most painful betrayal into the most important lesson my son ever learned. I was married to my husband Thomas for 43 wonderful years before a sudden heart attack took him from us 5 years ago. He was a kind, hard-working man who dedicated his life to providing for our family. Thomas worked as a civil engineer, and I taught 4th grade at Lincoln Elementary for 35 years. We weren't wealthy by any means, but we saved carefully and built a comfortable life in our modest suburban home in Pennsylvania. We raised 2 sons who couldn't have been more different from each other. Jackson, now 42, was always ambitious and competitive from a young age. He excelled in school without much effort, captained the debate team, and eventually went to an Ivy League college on a partial scholarship. Thomas and I stretched our finances thin to help cover the remaining tuition. Jackson went on to law school and now works as a corporate attorney at a prestigious firm in Philadelphia. David, 38, was always the sensitive, thoughtful child. He struggled more academically but worked twice as hard. He attended the state university and followed in my footsteps to become a high school English teacher. He found his calling helping teenagers discover their love for literature, just as I had done with younger children. The differences between my sons extended far beyond their careers. Jackson married Natalie, a beautiful interior designer from a wealthy family. They live in a sprawling 5-bedroom house in an exclusive neighborhood with their 3 children twins, Abigail and Andrew, 12, and Sophie, 8. Their home is always perfectly decorated, filled with expensive furniture and the latest electronics. They take lavish vacations and drive luxury cars. Yet, despite Jackson's 6-figure salary, he always seemed to be struggling financially. David married his college sweetheart, Sarah, a pediatric nurse. They live in a cozy 3-bedroom house not far from mine. Their son, Timothy, is 10, and the spitting image of his father at that age. They live modestly, but seem genuinely happy and content with what they have. The relationship between my sons has always been strained. Jackson often belittles David's career choice and lifestyle, making snide comments about his lack of ambition. David usually brushes these comments off, but I can see the hurt in his eyes. Thomas always tried to mediate between them, but after his passing, the tension only grew worse. My relationship with David has always been easy and natural. He calls me almost every day, brings Timothy over regularly, and is the first to offer help when I need it. With Jackson, things are more complicated. He visits rarely, usually when he needs something, and our conversations often revolve around his financial concerns or complaints about his busy life. Over the years, Jackson has come to me repeatedly for financial help. When he and Natalie found their dream house 7 years ago, they couldn't quite afford it on their own. Jackson convinced me to co-sign their mortgage, assuring me it was just a formality. I wanted to help my son achieve his dreams, so I agreed without hesitation. Thomas was hesitant, but supported my decision to help our son. After Thomas passed away, Jackson's requests for money became more frequent. There was always some emergency or opportunity that required immediate funds. Each time I dipped into my savings or retirement accounts to help him, believing he would pay me back as he promised. He rarely did. Meanwhile, David never asked for financial assistance, even when I knew he and Sarah were struggling to make ends meet after Timothy was born with some health complications. When I offered help, he politely declined, saying they would manage on their own. As Christmas approached last year, I was looking forward to hosting everyone at my home. I spent weeks decorating the house and shopping for thoughtful gifts. For the grandchildren, I carefully selected presents that matched their interests, art supplies for artistic Abigail, a telescope for science enthusiast, Andrew, a collection of chapter books for avid reader Sophie, and building sets for Hans. On Timothy, I found a beautiful cashmere sweater for Natalie and a rare first edition book for Sarah. For my sons, I had something special planned. I had taken some of Thomas's old watches to be restored. Jackson would receive his father's luxury Swiss timepiece, while David would get the more modest but sentimental pocket watch that had belonged to Thomas's father. I also prepared envelopes with checks inside the same amount for each son drawn from the money Thomas and I had saved over our lifetime. I was so excited to see everyone's faces on Christmas morning. Little did I know that this holiday season would unfold in a way I never could have imagined. The week before Christmas, I decided to drop off some gifts at Jackson's house ahead of time. The presents for the children were quite large, and I wanted to make sure they were hidden away before the kids could spot them. I called Natalie earlier to let her know I was coming, and she mentioned they would be home all afternoon. I arrived around 3:30, letting myself in with the spare key they had given me for emergencies. The house was quiet, which was unusual for a home with 3 active children. I assumed they might be out in the backyard, or perhaps at a neighbor's house. I carefully carried the gift bags up the stairs, planning to hide them in the guest room closet, as I had done in previous years. As I passed Jackson's home office, I heard his voice. He was on the phone, his tone agitated and annoyed. I paused, not wanting to interrupt his call. That's when I heard words that stopped me cold. "No, I can't liquidate any more assets right now," Jackson was saying. "The market's down and I've already taken too many losses this year. I'm waiting for my mother's inheritance. Honestly, the greatest gift would be if she died, so I could finally get my inheritance and clear all this debt. She's getting old anyway, and that money is just sitting there while I'm drowning in payments." My hands began to shake so badly that I nearly dropped the bags I was holding. My heart felt like it had been pierced with an icicle. The oxygen seemed to vanish from the air around me. My own son, my firstborn child, whom I had nurtured and sacrificed for, was casually discussing the benefits of my death with a business associate. I stood there frozen as he continued the conversation, unaware of my presence. He went on to detail how much he expected to inherit and how he had already mentally allocated my savings and the value of my house to various debts and purchases he planned to make. He spoke of my death not with sadness or dread, but with practical calculation, as if it were simply a financial transaction he was waiting to complete. I quietly set down the gift bags at the top of the stairs and left the house as silently as I had entered. I don't remember the drive home. The next thing I knew, I was sitting in my parked car in my own driveway, tears streaming down my face. That night I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. The words played over and over in my mind like a horrible recording. The greatest gift would be if she died, my own son wishing for my death for financial gain. How had we come to this? I thought back to when Jackson was born, how I had held his tiny body against mine, promising to love and protect him always. I remembered teaching him to ride a bike, the hours spent, helping with homework, attending every soccer game and school event. The thousands of meals, cooked clothes, washed, scraped knees bandaged. The college tuition payments that had drained our savings, but that we had paid willingly, believing in his bright future. The next morning, I called David and asked if he could come over. When he arrived and saw my face, he immediately knew something was wrong. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where our family had shared countless meals, and I told him what I had overheard. David's face flushed with anger. How could he say something like that? After everything you've done for him, Mom, this is beyond unacceptable. I keep thinking I must have misunderstood, I said, still trying to find some way to excuse my eldest son's words. Maybe he was just frustrated and venting. David shook his head. Mom, this isn't the first time Jackson has talked about your money. He's mentioned to me several times how he's counting on his inheritance to solve his financial problems. This revelation only deepened my pain. But he makes so much money, I said. How can he be in such financial trouble? David hesitated before responding. I probably should have told you this sooner, but I didn't want to worry you. Sarah's brother works at the same country club where Jackson golfs. He's overheard things. Jackson has a gambling problem, Mom. He's lost a lot of money at high-stakes poker games. And their lifestyle is completely beyond their means. The vacations, the cars, the private school tuition for the kids, it's all funded by debt. The pieces started falling into place. The frequent requests for loans, the refinancing of their house, the constant financial emergencies. All this time I had believed Jackson when he told me these were temporary setbacks, investments that would pay off later. Now I understood that I had been enabling an addiction and a lifestyle that was unsustainable. What are you going to do? David asked gently. I don't know, I replied honestly. Part of me wants to confront him, but another part just wants to pretend I never heard it. Christmas is only a few days away. Maybe I should just get through the holidays and deal with this afterward. David reached across the table and took my hand. Whatever you decide to do, I'm here for you. But Mom, you can't keep rescuing him. It's not helping him. It's just postponing the inevitable. I nodded, knowing he was right, but not yet ready to face what that meant. After David left, I sat alone in my quiet house, surrounded by Christmas decorations that suddenly seemed mockingly cheerful. The truth was that I had no idea what to do next. The pain was still too raw, too overwhelming to think clearly. All I knew was that something had fundamentally changed. The relationship I thought I had with my son was not real, and the plans I had made for Christmas, for my future, for my legacy, all needed to be reconsidered in light of this painful truth. That night's sleep eluded me once again. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, memories flooding my mind like a relentless tide. I remembered Jackson as a toddler, his chubby hands reaching for me, his face lighting up when I entered the room. I saw him at 7 years old, proudly showing me the A on his math test. At 12, winning the school science fair. At 18, handsome in his graduation gown, the world at his feet. Where had that sweet boy gone? When had he become this man who could speak so callously about his own mother's death? Had the values Thomas and I tried to instill simply not taken root, or had something along the way corrupted them? I thought about how we had raised our sons. We had tried to teach them that money wasn't everything, that character and kindness mattered more than possessions or status. David had embraced these lessons, but Jackson had always been drawn to material things. Even as a child, he coveted the newest toys, the trendiest clothes. We had tried to moderate these tendencies to show him the value of contentment and gratitude, but perhaps we had failed. Or perhaps more painfully, I had undermined those very lessons in how I had treated Jackson as an adult. By constantly coming to his financial rescue, by co-signing his mortgage for a house he couldn't afford, by writing checks whenever he called with a crisis, Had I enabled the very materialism and entitlement I had tried to discourage? As the first light of dawn filtered through my curtains, I realized I needed professional advice. After breakfast, I called Martin Fletcher, my financial advisor, who had been helping me manage my affairs since Thomas passed away. Martin had been a friend of Thomas's since college, and I trusted him implicitly. "I can see you at 11, Martin said when I explained I needed to talk urgently. His office was in a small building downtown, tastefully furnished, but not ostentatious. When I arrived, Martin greeted me with a warm handshake and concerned eyes. "Sheila, you look exhausted," he said, as he showed me to a comfortable chair. "What's going on?" I explained the situation, my voice breaking several times as I recounted Jackson's words. Martin listened, without interrupting his expression, growing more troubled as I spoke. When I finished, he sighed deeply. "I wish I could say I'm completely surprised, but there have been signs. Jackson has called me several times, asking about your financial situation, your will, even whether there are ways to access your retirement accounts for family emergencies." I felt a fresh wave of betrayal wash over me. He's been asking about my money, behind my back. Martin nodded grimly. I never told him anything, of course. Client confidentiality aside, something about his questions didn't sit right with me. Now I understand why. What should I do, Martin? I feel so hurt, so angry, but he's still my son. First, I think we need to get clarity on the mortgage situation, Martin said, opening a folder on his desk. You mentioned you co-signed his mortgage 7 years ago. I've pulled some information based on what you've shared with me previously. He showed me documents indicating that Jackson had refinanced the house multiple times over the years, taking out equity each time. As a co-signer, I was still legally responsible for the loan, but I had never been consulted about these refinancing decisions. This is concerning, Sheila, Martin said. The current mortgage is underwater, meaning they owe more than the house is worth in today's market, and according to this, they've missed 2 payments already this quarter. I had no idea, I said, the knot in my stomach tightening. He never told me about any of this. As a co-signer, your credit is at risk here, and if they default, you would be liable for the remaining balance. I sat back, trying to absorb this new information. What are my options? Well, legally speaking, as a co-signer, you have certain rights. You could contact the bank and request to be removed from the loan, but given the missed payments and the loan-to-value ratio, that's unlikely to be approved. You could also, he hesitated. What? You could pay off the mortgage yourself. Given what you've told me about your savings and investments, you have the funds to do so. It would mean liquidating some of your retirement accounts, which isn't ideal, but it would protect your credit and give you leverage in the situation. Leverage. If you pay off the mortgage, you could have the deed transferred to your name. The house would legally be yours. It would be a significant financial outlay now, but it would protect your investment and give you control. I sat silently, considering this option. It would mean using a large portion of my savings money I had set aside for my own security in old age. But it would also mean taking action, regaining some control in a situation where I had felt powerless. I need to think about this, I said finally. Of course, Martin replied. Take your time. But Sheila, whatever you decide, I think it's important that you stop enabling Jackson's financial irresponsibility. Sometimes, the most loving thing we can do for our children is to let them face the consequences of their actions. On the way home, I called Janet Reeves, a family attorney I had consulted when updating my will after Thomas died. I explained the situation and asked about the legal implications of Martin's suggestion. "It's certainly doable," Janet said, "but it would be a significant financial decision. Come by my office tomorrow, and we can go through the details." That night I sat in Thomas's old armchair, the one he used to read in every evening, and tried to imagine what he would advise. Thomas had always been the more cautious parent, the one who worried about spoiling the children or giving them too much too soon. He had expressed concerns about co-signing Jackson's mortgage, though he had ultimately supported my decision. "What would you do, Thomas?" I whispered to the empty room. And somehow, in the quiet of our home, I felt I knew the answer. Thomas would say that real love sometimes means making difficult choices, that helping someone isn't always about giving them what they want, but what they need. By morning, my decision was made. I would take action, not out of anger or revenge, but out of love for my son, and a desire to help him find his way back to the values we had tried to teach him. It wouldn't be easy, and he might hate me for it initially, but sometimes a parent has to take the long view. With renewed determination, I called Martin and Janet and told them I was ready to move forward. The next morning, I drove to First National Bank, where Jackson's mortgage was held. I had made an appointment with a loan officer named Brian Simmons, who greeted me with a professional smile as I was shown into his office. "Mrs. Wilson, how can I help you today?" he asked. "I'm a co-signer on my son's mortgage," I explained, sliding the documents Martin had prepared for me across his desk. "I'd like to understand exactly where things stand with the loan." Brian examined the paperwork, typing information into his computer. His expression became more serious as he reviewed the account. "I see. Yes, you are indeed listed as a co-signer on this mortgage, and there appear to be some issues with the account." He looked up at me. "There have been several late payments over the past year, and as you can see here, they're currently 2 months behind." Even though Martin had prepared me for this hearing, it confirmed by the bank was still a blow. What happens if the payments continue to be missed? Well, after 3 missed payments, we would begin the foreclosure process. As a co-signer, this would significantly impact your credit rating, and you would be liable for any remaining balance after the sale of the property if it doesn't cover the outstanding loan amount. I took a deep breath. I understand. And what if I wanted to pay off the mortgage myself? Is that possible? Brian looked surprised but quickly recovered. "Yes, as a co-signer, you have the right to make payments or pay off the loan entirely. Would you like information about the payoff amount?" "Yes, please." He printed out a statement and handed it to me. The number at the bottom made my heart race. $423,017. It was a staggering sum, nearly 2/3 of my total savings and investments. And if I paid this off, what would happen to the ownership of the house? "That's more of a legal question," Brian said. "The names on the deed wouldn't automatically change. You would need to work with an attorney to address the ownership structure." I nodded, having already discussed this with Janet. "I'd like to proceed with paying off this mortgage today." Brian's eyebrows rose slightly. "The entire amount?" "Yes. I'll need to involve our mortgage department manager for a transaction of this size. It might take a few hours to process everything." "I understand. I've cleared my schedule for the day." While the bank processed the paperwork, I called Janet to let her know we were proceeding. She promised to have the deed transfer documents ready for me to pick up afterward. By late afternoon, it was done. I had liquidated a significant portion of my investment accounts and retirement savings to pay off the mortgage in full. I held in my hands a document showing a zero balance, the loan marked "Paid in Full" in bold red letters. From the bank, I drove directly to Janet's office to collect the legal documents she had prepared. These included papers transferring the deed to my name and a detailed letter explaining the legal situation to Jackson. "Are you sure about this?" Sheila Janet asked as she handed me the folder. "It's not too late to reconsider." I'm sure I said, my voice steadier than I had expected. "This isn't just about the money anymore. It's about teaching my son a lesson about values and consequences before it's too late." Next, I went home and sat at my dining room table to write a personal letter to accompany the legal documents. I wrote and rewrote it several times, trying to find the right words to express both my pain and my love. I wanted Jackson to understand that this action came from a place of concern, not punishment. After finalizing the letter, I waited until evening, when I knew Jackson and his family would be out at the twins' school concert. Using the spare key I still had, I entered their house quietly. It felt strange and uncomfortable, almost like trespassing, despite having been given permission to use the key for emergencies. Was this an emergency? Perhaps not in the conventional sense, but it felt like a crisis point in our relationship, a moment that would define our future as mother and son. I made my way to Jackson's home office, the same room where I had overheard his cruel words days earlier. I placed the folder containing the mortgage documents, legal papers, and my letter prominently on his desk. On top, I left a note that simply said, "Jackson, what you said hurt me deeply. Read everything in this folder. We need to talk when you're ready. Mom." For a moment, I stood there in his office, looking at the family photos on the wall. Jackson and Natalie on their wedding day. The children at various ages. A family portrait from last summer, everyone smiling brightly against a backdrop of ocean and sky. They looked happy, perfect. But appearances could be deceiving, as I had painfully learned. I left the house as quietly as I had entered, locking the door behind me. In my car, I sat for several minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel, wondering if I had done the right thing. There was no turning back now. The mortgage was paid off, the deed transfer in process. Jackson would soon discover what I had done, and I had to be prepared for his reaction. On the drive home, I called David to tell him what I had done. He was silent for a moment after I finished explaining. "That's a lot of money, Mom," he said finally. "Are you going to be okay?" "I'll have enough," I assured him. "I've still got my teacher's pension and some investments left. I won't be taking any luxury cruises, but I'll manage." "Jackson is going to be furious," David warned. "I know, but maybe this will be the wake-up call he needs. Do you want me to be there when he finds out, for support?" I considered this offer grateful for my younger son's concern. "No, honey. This is between Jackson and me. But thank you." That night, I canceled the Christmas gathering I had planned. I couldn't face hosting everyone, as if nothing had happened, pretending that my heart wasn't breaking. Instead, I accepted David and Sarah's invitation to spend Christmas Day with them. It wouldn't be the holiday I had envisioned, but at least I would be with family who truly cared about me, not just what I could give them. As I lay in bed that night, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Sadness for the rift this would cause, anxiety about Jackson's reaction, but also, surprisingly, a sense of peace. For the first time since overhearing Jackson's words, I felt like I had taken back some control. I had made a difficult decision out of love, not anger or revenge. Whatever happened next, I would face it knowing I had acted with the best intentions. The call came at 6:15 the next morning. I was barely awake, still in my robe, making my first cup of coffee, when my phone rang. Jackson's name flashed on the screen. My heart immediately began racing, but I took a deep breath before answering. "How could you do this?" Jackson's voice was a mixture of fury and disbelief. "You had no right." "Good morning, Jackson," I said, keeping my voice calm despite my churning emotions. "I assume you found the documents." "Found them. You broke into my house and left them on my desk. You went behind my back to pay off my mortgage and steal my house. What kind of mother does something like that?" His words stung, but I had prepared myself for this reaction. "I didn't break in, Jackson. I used the key you gave me, and as for the mortgage, I was a co-signer on a loan that you were failing to pay. I had every legal right to protect myself." "This is unbelievable," he spat. "You've completely overstepped. I'm calling my lawyer. You can't just take someone's house. I think you should read all the documents and my letter before you do anything I said. And Jackson, we both know this isn't just about the house. We need to talk about what I overheard last week." There was a pause, a moment of confused silence. "What are you talking about?" "I came by last week to drop off Christmas gifts. I overheard your phone conversation about how the greatest gift would be if I died, so you could get your inheritance." Another pause, longer this time. When Jackson spoke again, his voice had lost some of its fire. "You weren't supposed to hear that. I didn't mean it." "But you said it, Jackson. Those words came from somewhere. Do you have any idea how much that hurt me to hear my own son talking about my death as a financial opportunity? I was stressed about money. I say things I don't mean when I'm stressed." His tone was defensive, but had a new edge of discomfort. "Look, I'm sorry if that hurt you, but it doesn't justify what you've done." "I think it does. It made me realize I've been enabling behavior that goes against everything your father and I tried to teach you. This isn't just about money, Jackson. It's about values, about what kind of man you're becoming." "Save the lecture," he snapped. "This isn't about my values. This is about you controlling me with money like you always have." I felt a flash of indignation. "When have I ever controlled you? I've done nothing but support you financially and otherwise, often at my own expense." "Whatever. This conversation is pointless. I'll be talking to my lawyer about getting my house back. Don't call me." He hung up. I set my phone down, hands shaking. Despite having anticipated his anger, the reality of it was still painful. I had hoped somewhere deep down that he might show some remorse, some understanding of why I had taken such a drastic step. Instead, he had immediately gone on the attack, seeing himself as the victim, rather than recognizing his own role in creating this situation. Later that morning, as I was weeding my garden in an attempt to distract myself, a car pulled into my driveway. It was Natalie. She got out alone, looking nervous and tired. "Natalie," I said, standing and removing my gardening gloves. "This is a surprise." "Can we talk, Sheila?" she asked, her voice subdued, privately. "Of course. Come inside." We sat at my kitchen table, the same place where I had told David about Jackson's hurtful words. I offered Natalie coffee, which she accepted with a grateful nod. "Jackson doesn't know I'm here," she began after taking a sip. "He would be furious if he knew." "I imagine he's already quite furious with me," I said. Natalie looked down at her cup. "He is. But Sheila, there's more to this situation than you know." She raised her eyes to meet mine, and I was surprised to see they were filled with tears. "We're in serious financial trouble. The missed mortgage payments aren't the half of it." "What do you mean?" She took a deep, shuddering breath. "Jackson has a gambling problem. It started with poker games at the country club, but it escalated to online betting casinos in Atlantic City. He's lost so much money, Sheila. We're drowning in debt. Credit cards maxed out, personal loans from people you don't want to owe money to." Despite David having mentioned Jackson's gambling hearing, the confirmation from Natalie was still shocking. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Jackson swore me to secrecy. He kept saying he could fix it, that he just needed one big win to turn things around. I was scared, confused. I didn't know what to do. A tear slipped down her cheek. Our marriage has been falling apart. We fight constantly about money. The kids are starting to notice. It's been a nightmare. I reached across the table and took her hand. I'm so sorry, Natalie. I had no idea things were so bad. That's why he said what he did about your. She couldn't finish the sentence. He didn't mean it, Sheila. He was desperate and scared. These people he owes money to, they've started making threats. My concern deepened. What kind of threats? Nothing specific yet, but the implication is clear. Pay up or else. Jackson's terrified, though he tries to hide it. That's why he's been asking about your money, your will. He's not thinking clearly. He's just trying to find a way out of this mess. While this explanation provided context for Jackson's cruel words, it didn't excuse them. And it confirmed that my decision to take action had been the right one, albeit for reasons I hadn't fully understood at the time. What will you do now? I asked. About the house, I mean. Natalie looked surprised. You mean you're not going to make us leave? No, of course not. I would never put my grandchildren out of their home. But Jackson and I need to have a serious conversation about the future, about how to address these issues. Relief flooded Natalie's face. Thank you. I was so afraid. Jackson said we might have to move, that we'd lost everything. The house is secure now, I assured her. But Natalie, Jackson needs help. Professional help. This isn't something he can overcome on his own. She nodded, wiping away tears. I know. I've been telling him that for months. But he refuses to listen. Maybe now that things have come to a head. Christmas Day arrived, and I spent it at David and Sarah's house as planned. It was a quiet, comfortable gathering, with Timothy's excitement over his gifts providing much-needed joy. David and Sarah were careful not to mention Jackson, but his absence hung in the air like an invisible guest. In the afternoon, as Sarah and I were cleaning up after Christmas dinner, the doorbell rang. David answered it, and to everyone's surprise, it was Natalie with Abigail, Andrew, and Sophie. We were hoping we could stop by, Natalie said tentatively. The kids really wanted to see their grandmother on Christmas. The children rushed to hug me, their innocent affection bringing tears to my eyes. They were blameless in this adult conflict, yet they would inevitably be affected by it. Where's Dad? Timothy asked his cousins, voicing the question the adults had avoided. He said he had work to do, Andrew replied with the directness of a 12-year-old. He seemed really mad about something. The adults exchanged glances, but said nothing more. Instead, we focused on making the rest of the day as normal and joyful as possible for the children's sake. We played board games, drank hot chocolate, and exchanged the gifts I had brought to David's house after canceling the gathering at mine. As Natalie and the children were leaving, she hugged me tightly. Thank you for today, she whispered, and for everything else. I think this might be the wake-up call Jackson needs. It won't be easy, but maybe something good can come from all this pain. I hoped she was right. Despite my hurt and anger, I still loved my son. I wanted healing for our family, not permanent estrangement. The path forward was unclear, but I had taken the first difficult step. 3 days after Christmas, I was at home reading when I heard a car door slam in my driveway. Through the window, I saw Jackson getting out of his car, his movements agitated and his expression grim. This was the confrontation I had been both expecting and dreading. I opened the door before he could knock or ring the bell. "Hello, Jackson," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He looked terrible. His face was haggard with dark circles under his eyes, suggesting he hadn't been sleeping. His normally immaculate appearance was disheveled, his tie loose and his shirt wrinkled. "Can I come in?" he asked, his tone subdued compared to our phone conversation. "Of course." I led him to the living room, where he sank into an armchair, running his hands through his hair in a gesture of distress. "Would you like something to drink?" I offered, not knowing how else to begin. "No." He looked up at me, his eyes red-rimmed. "Mom, I'm in trouble. Serious trouble." I sat down across from him. Natalie told me about the gambling. His shoulders sagged. "Of course she did. Well, it's worse than she knows. I owe money to some very dangerous people. They're not the kind who accept late payments or renegotiated terms. They've started making threats, not just against me, but against Natalie and the kids." Fear gripped my heart. "Have you gone to the police?" He laughed bitterly. "And tell them what? That I willingly gambled with criminals and now can't pay. That I took loans from people connected to organized crime. They can't help me, and trying would only make things worse." "How much do you owe?" I asked, dreading the answer. $287,000, he said, the number falling between us like a stone. I couldn't hide my shock. "Jackson, how? How did it get to this point?" He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. "It started small. Poker games at the club. I was good one more than I lost at first. Then I started playing in bigger games with higher stakes. When I began losing, I convinced myself it was just a streak of bad luck. I'd win it back next time. But next time never came." He paused. "When the credit cards were maxed out and the home equity line was gone, I turned to private lenders. People who don't ask questions about collateral or credit scores. Loan sharks." I said the term, feeling strange and cinematic in relation to my son's life. He nodded. "The interest rates are impossible. The debt just keeps growing. And now," he swallowed hard, "now they're getting impatient." I wanted to be angry with him. I wanted to lecture him on responsibility and the foolishness of his actions. But looking at my son, broken and terrified, in my living room, I could only feel a profound sadness. "Why didn't you come to me sooner, before things got so out of control?" He looked up, his expression a mix of shame and defiance. "Because I'm supposed to be the successful one, the son you're proud of, not the failure who gambled away everything and put his family at risk." His voice cracked. "David was always the good one, the responsible one. I was supposed to be the achiever, the one who made something of himself." "Jackson, that's not—" I began, but he cut me off. "Don't say it's not true. I've seen how you look at David, how you talk about him. You're proud of him for being a teacher, for living in his modest house with his perfect little family, while I'm just the materialistic son who's never satisfied, who always wants more." The raw pain in his voice took me by surprise. I had never realized he felt this way, that he saw his relationship with me and his brother through such a distorted lens. "I've always been proud of both my sons," I said carefully. "But being proud of someone isn't just about their achievements or possessions. It's about who they are as people, the choices they make, how they treat others." "Well, I've made some pretty terrible choices," he said bitterly. "So I guess that confirms your opinion of me." "Jackson, this isn't about my opinion. This is about your life, your family's safety. We need to focus on solutions, not on old resentments or misunderstandings." He ran his hands through his hair again, a gesture so reminiscent of his father that it made my heart ache. "I don't have any solutions. That's why I'm here. You've taken my house. I thought maybe you could help with the rest of it too." I felt a flash of irritation at his framing of the situation. "I didn't take your house, Jackson. I protected it for your family when you were about to lose it. There's a difference." "Semantics," he muttered. No intention. And my intention was to help, not harm. Just as my intention now is to find a way through this crisis that leads to healing, not just a financial bailout that allows the cycle to continue. What does that mean? I took a deep breath, gathering my courage for what needed to be said. It means I won't simply write a check to get these people off your back, not unless you agree to some conditions. His eyes narrowed. Conditions? My family is being threatened, and you're setting conditions. Yes, I said firmly, because paying off this debt without addressing the underlying problem would be like putting a bandage on a wound that needs surgery. You need help, Jackson. Professional help for your gambling addiction, financial counseling, for your money management, and you need to be honest with yourself and your family about how you got here. Jackson stood up abruptly and began pacing the room. So you'll only help me if I admit I'm an addict, if I go to therapy and let strangers pick apart my life. Is that what you're saying? I'm saying I'll help you rebuild your life, not just paper over the cracks. The house will remain in my name until you've demonstrated that you're committed to recovery and responsible financial management. I'll help with your debt, but only if you commit to getting the help you need. He stopped pacing and stared at me, a storm of emotions crossing his face. Anger, resentment, fear, and beneath it all a glimmer of something that might have been relief. And if I refuse, then you'll need to find another solution, I said, my heart breaking even as I held firm, because I won't enable behavior that's destroying you and threatening your family. The silence that followed seemed endless. Finally, Jackson sank back into the chair, the fight gone out of him. I don't know if I can do it, he whispered, and for a moment he sounded like a frightened child. I've tried to stop before. It never lasts. You haven't had the right help, I said gently, and you haven't had consequences serious enough to motivate lasting change. Now you do. In that moment, something shifted between us. The pretenses and defenses began to crumble, revealing the pain and vulnerability beneath. I'm scared, Mom, he admitted, his voice small. I know, I said, moving to sit beside him and taking his hand. But you're not alone. We'll get through this together. Over the next few hours, we talked more openly than we had in years. Jackson revealed the full extent of his gambling addiction, how it had escalated from occasional poker games to an all-consuming obsession. He spoke of the rush he felt when winning the desperation, when losing the increasingly risky bets made in an attempt to recoup losses. He acknowledged the strain it had put on his marriage, his work performance, his relationships with his children. By the time he left that evening, we had the outline of a plan. I would help address the immediate threat by paying off his dangerous creditors using most of my remaining savings. In exchange, Jackson would enter an intensive outpatient treatment program for gambling addiction. He would also agree to financial counseling and to give Natalie control of their finances during his recovery. The house would remain in my name for at least 1 year, with the possibility of transferring it back if certain benchmarks were met. It wasn't an easy conversation, and there were moments of resistance and resentment. But beneath the pain and hurt, I could see my son beginning to accept responsibility for his actions, perhaps for the first time in his adult life. The next step was a family intervention which David helped me organize with the assistance of an addiction counselor. Natalie, David, Sarah, and I gathered to confront Jackson with the impact his gambling had had on our lives and to present a united front regarding his need for treatment. It was a grueling, emotional session. Jackson alternated between anger denial and heart-wrenching vulnerability. At one point, he broke down completely sobbing, as he admitted how out of control he felt, how frightened he was of the person he had become. I don't know who I am anymore, he said through tears. "Everything I thought was important seems meaningless now. All I've accomplished, the career, the house, the status. What does it matter if I've put my family at risk? If my own mother has to bail me out? If my children might have been harmed because of my actions?" It was a moment of profound reckoning, painful to witness, but necessary for healing to begin. In that raw, unguarded moment, I saw a glimpse of the son I had raised, the boy with a conscience and capacity for growth, who had been buried beneath years of materialism and denial. The road ahead would not be easy. Recovery never is. But as we left that intervention with Jackson having agreed to all the terms and conditions, I felt the first stirring of genuine hope. This crisis, born of pain and betrayal, might ultimately lead to redemption and renewal, not just for Jackson, but for our entire family. 6 months later, on a warm summer evening, I sat on my back porch watching my grandchildren play in the yard. Abigail and Andrew were teaching Timothy and Sophie how to play croquet, their laughter floating on the gentle breeze. It was a scene of ordinary family joy, yet to me it felt like a miracle given how close we had come to shattering apart. Jackson's journey in recovery had been challenging but transformative. After completing an intensive 12-week treatment program for gambling addiction, he continued with therapy and regular Gamblers Anonymous meetings. There had been moments of struggle and temptation, but so far he had maintained his commitment to sobriety. The financial situation had been equally challenging. After paying off Jackson's dangerous creditors, I had worked with a lawyer to set up a structured repayment plan for Jackson to eventually reimburse me. It would take years, but the framework acknowledged both his responsibility and my support. Natalie had taken a job as an interior design consultant at a high-end furniture store, discovering a renewed sense of purpose and independence in contributing to the family finances. Jackson had made the difficult decision to leave his high-pressure corporate law position for a role with fewer hours and less status but a healthier work environment. The pay cut was substantial, but with their newly established budget and financial discipline they were managing. Family therapy had been perhaps the most profound part of the healing process. Jackson and David had begun to address the rivalry and resentment that had characterized their relationship for decades. Old wounds were acknowledged, misunderstandings clarified. It wasn't always comfortable, but it was necessary. In one particularly powerful session, Jackson had finally articulated feelings of inadequacy he'd harbored since childhood. "I always felt like I had to be exceptional to be noticed," he admitted. David seemed naturally good, naturally kind. Everyone liked him without him having to try. I felt like I had to achieve, to excel, to be worthy of the same kind of love. This revelation had been painful for me to hear. Had I inadvertently contributed to this perception? Had my attempts to encourage Jackson's ambition been interpreted as conditional approval? These were questions I continued to grapple with in my own therapy sessions. The house situation remained as planned. The deed was still in my name, but Jackson and his family continued living there with a clear understanding of the conditions for eventual transfer back to them. They had not missed a single payment on their utilities or other household expenses since our agreement, a small but significant indication of their commitment to financial responsibility. The relationship between Jackson and me had undergone its own evolution. The crisis had stripped away pretenses and forced an honesty that, while initially painful, had ultimately brought us closer. I saw my son more clearly now, both his weaknesses and his strengths, and I believe he saw me more clearly too, not as a source of infinite support or an obstacle to his desires, but as a human being with my own needs, fears, and capacity for both hurt and forgiveness. "Grandma, watch this," Sophie called, successfully hitting her croquet ball through a wicket. I applauded her achievement, treasuring these ordinary moments that had once seemed in jeopardy. Later that evening, after the children had gone home, with Natalie, Jackson stayed behind to talk. We sat in the same living room where 6 months earlier he had broken down and admitted the extent of his troubles. "I've been thinking a lot about what you did," he said. "Paying off the mortgage, transferring the deed to your name. At the time I was furious. I felt betrayed, controlled." "I know," I said. "It was a drastic step." It was, he agreed. "But looking back now, I think it might have saved my life. If you hadn't taken such dramatic action, I would have kept spiraling, kept denying there was a problem until something truly catastrophic happened." I reached out and squeezed his hand. Sometimes love looks like support and encouragement. Sometimes it looks like boundaries and consequences. "I'm starting to understand that," he said. "I think about how I've been parenting my own children. I've tried to give them everything to shield them from any disappointment or struggle. But I'm not sure that was really for their benefit. I think a lot of it was about how it made me look, about proving I was successful." "Parenting is a journey of constant learning," I said. "We all make mistakes. The important thing is to recognize them and try to do better." He nodded thoughtfully. "That's what I'm trying to do now. With the kids, with Natalie, with my whole life, really. To figure out what actually matters and focus on that instead of chasing some image of success that was making me miserable." "And what have you discovered matters?" I asked. "The stuff I used to take for granted," he said with a small smile. "Family dinners where we actually talk to each other. Teaching Andrew to fish. Helping Abigail with her science project. Reading bedtime stories to Sophie. Being present for Natalie, really listening to her. These simple things have brought me more peace than all the status symbols and achievements I used to chase." As Jackson left that evening, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. Not for the resolution of the financial crisis, though, that was certainly a relief. Not even for Jackson's recovery, though I thanked God for it daily. What filled my heart was gratitude for the deeper healing that had occurred, the restoration of relationships that had seemed irreparably damaged. The painful words I had overheard, that December day, the greatest gift would be if she died, had led to a kind of death and rebirth, the death of old patterns, false assumptions, and enabling behaviors, the birth of honesty, accountability, and a more authentic kind of love. That Christmas, we established a new family tradition. Instead of expensive gifts, each family member created something homemade or planned an experience to share with others. David built a beautiful birdhouse for my garden. Sarah compiled a family cookbook with all our favorite recipes. Timothy wrote and illustrated a short story about a grandmother and her grandchildren having adventures. Jackson, Natalie, and their children gave me a calendar they had made together each month, featuring photos of family moments and handwritten notes about memories we had shared or planned to create. It was simple, but deeply meaningful, a tangible representation of their changing values. As we sat around the table after Christmas dinner, I looked at the faces of my family and felt a fullness in my heart that no material possession could ever provide. The journey had been painful, the lessons hard-won, but the outcome was beyond price. True wealth, I had come to understand, more deeply than ever, isn't measured in bank accounts or possessions. It's found in relationships built on honesty and respect, in the courage to face difficult truths, in the capacity for growth and change, even when it's uncomfortable, in the willingness to choose love over fear, connection over control, forgiveness over resentment. Sometimes the most precious gifts come wrapped in the most painful packages. And sometimes when someone wishes for your death, it can lead to a more authentic life for you both. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision out of love? One that might have seemed harsh in the moment, but was truly for someone's benefit? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Remember, sometimes the hardest conversations are the most important ones we'll ever have. Thank you for listening, and may you find the courage to choose love, even when it's difficult.